as much as I love talking and writing, I reject the idea that I can just go in and have a rational conversation with someone and convince them that I'm right. Very, very rarely happens. And that's why I go back to the fact that you need to get people engaged and involved in action, because once again, then they're actually performing the ideas. They are performing them. And that actually, if you study psychology and neural rewiring, that rewires the brain. It creates new patterns and pathways. You need to get them participating in things and in activism. And this is one of those areas where the LP really needs to be doing more.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. I have your permission to record, upload, and use this in perpetuity.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 318. I have Amanda Griffiths, who is with LP Alliance right now. She's in Wisconsin, and she's done a few other things with the Libertarian Party. How are you, Amanda?
I'm wonderful, Chris. Thanks so much for having me.
We're going to talk about the current state of the Libertarian Party and where things might go from here, possible strategies for rebuilding and maybe getting out there and seeing what we can do with the current state of things. I first like to ask this question, Amanda. How did you become a libertarian, and how did you end up where you are now?
Many weird mistakes. No, I became a libertarian. I was always libertarian minded. I don't think my politics really changed. My partisan identification did. I formally began to identify as a libertarian actually when I started working at the Cato Institute. So I was the editorial director for their Center for Monetary Financial Alternatives. Shout out to Cato people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when I first started sort of calling myself a libertarian. And around that time, there was, then we had COVID, and then we had the Joe Jorgensen campaign, and I became more and more invested in the party as a vehicle for change and more attentive to where it had potential and where it was falling short of that.
Yeah. So, and how, so are you, what, do you have any positions with the LP right now, or?
Yes. So I'm currently the secretary of LP Wisconsin. And as you mentioned, this is not a formal LP network, so we're not formally affiliated with the Libertarian Party. But I'm one of the organizers of LP Alliance, which is a coalition of folks within the Libertarian Party.
That's a lot what I'm trying to do with this podcast, Amanda. When I worked at Liberty Magazine, Bill Bradford said, "I'm not going to take sides in any of these faction wars," and I think it might be more that way now. I'm afraid social media has exacerbated it. And just because I find that there are a lot of different people are fighting good fights out there, and you just have to work on that. Uh, so, one of the things, so when did you first get involved with the Libertarian Party?
I first started, I became a member of the Libertarian Party in 2020, I believe.
Yeah.
And I first started, though, really paying attention to what was going on within the Libertarian Party and the dynamics around that time, and increasingly when we got into 2022, 2023, and there was some stuff with various caucuses and what were called the caucus wars. I began writing in earnest about some of the things that were going on in the Libertarian Party in November of last year, immediately after the Trump election. I got scared and I became upset with myself because I had been one of those people who was I was a libertarian and I did libertarian work. But as someone who's always been politically engaged, I had felt that I was sitting on the sidelines way too much, waiting for the Libertarian Party to get its act together and not actually stepping up myself, because I thought, well, I don't know anything about organizing a political party. And I thought, okay, well, then this is what happens, right? This is what happens when good people wait for someone else to act. And I realized that that was my problem as well on the national level. Everyone, and this is a problem with collective action, everyone is just waiting for someone else to do the thing. And I thought, well, I've got a bunch of ideas, I've got a bunch of thoughts, let me just get that out there and almost put out a flag, see if there are other people who are more knowledgeable and experienced than I am who can help and wanna work together.
Sometimes that happens though where you have I think sometimes people are just afraid to be first.
Yeah. So
I remember at my oldest brother's funeral and, and said, "Does anybody out there wanna say something?" And I eventually realized there are lots of people here that wanna say something, but nobody wants to be the first one.
yeah.
So I stood up and basically said that, "Yeah, well, nobody wants to be first, so I'll go first." And then after that, everybody started talking. I don't know, uh, if there's, but that's coming back to something else too, Amanda. I will admit also in 2020, I was still working for a hospital organization. I was a little afraid of getting visible myself,
Mhm.
because I wasn't sure if I got arrested or anything, that might get back to my employer and I'd be out of a job. Uh, but
Right.
I do remember going to a protest I think it was the third Thursday in April, and I said, "Okay, I'm here," illegally, but
Mhm.
and I kind of thought, what kind of libertarian am I if I'm not going to risk getting arrested?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where, like I said, collective action is so difficult because of this, right? That
Yeah.
everyone's waiting for somebody else to tell them what to do, but we're also libertarians, we don't like being told what to do. And that was one of the big issues with LP Alliance when we started is we needed people and we're the first movers are kind of on board and we needed to bring people on board without giving them marching orders because that's not what we want to do. We want people to be able to realize themselves through the realization of the cause, not by telling them go here, do this. And it really just comes down to showing people that you're there, you've got their back, and you're going to give them the opportunity for voice and for self-expression and self-development through a movement. And we're still really young, but that's one of the things that LP Alliance is really like working with these guys has taught me so much about organizing and about direct action that it's one of those things where the first people on board are really taking a risk. And so I'm so stoked by all the people who are on board right now because, this is a really young group and these are people who are doing amazingly brave things.
Yeah, I don't know, if more people had taken the risk. I'm still wondering and talking about what happened. Now it's 5 years ago with the coronavirus nonsense,
Mhm.
and I started posting on social media about it, saying this is scaremongering and it's just a way of making people scared. But and the one person at the time who was pretty vocal about it was Jeffrey Tucker. And he's always been a hero. I think he's the greatest hero. And but some people there was just some silence, and it reminded me. I think it was at one point in his career, Martin Luther King said something like, "I wasn't disappointed by the people who spoke out against me. I was disappointed by my friends who didn't speak." And
Yeah.
I'd say it was about a third of the movement just didn't know what to say or were afraid to say something or
Yeah.
I don't know what was in their heads or they were bought off or I've considered the possibility even that some were threatened.
And I don't know. I was in Los Angeles at that time. I'm
Yeah.
new to Wisconsin and Los Angeles, like when I left, it still hadn't recovered from COVID in terms of like the philosophy and the attitude, which is really sad for me because I went to USC as an undergrad. Like LA changed so much between my undergrad years and then when I went back there. Um, and it was one of those environments where you even if you wanted to say something, there were no channels for it, right? Like, you couldn't write something and get published in most outlets. Um, you couldn't speak up without getting in trouble, and I'm like you, I really felt like I wasn't doing enough, but I also felt like there was nobody who was gonna stand up with me, and I don't know if that was a common experience with people in the LP, but if I could go back and do things differently, I would raise a lot more hell.
Yeah, maybe so. When did you leave California?
That would have been in early 2023. So,
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I can imagine the changes that happen there. I there's a lot of things that have changed that we don't recognize anymore. It's,
Mhm.
yeah, USC, you know, I don't know. You know, the one thing that I think really is gonna be, the biggest impact is I think it might very well have killed, maybe not killed Hollywood, but really took a lot of life out of it.
It changed a lot. It was a very different place. So I when I was at USC, I actually studied acting. I was one of, like, 20 people who got into their BFA acting program, and so I was in the Hollywood area a lot.
Yeah.
Had an agent, was doing all that, and it was a very, very different environment when I came back. There wasn't this desire to socialize, people wouldn't it's one of those things, and it still is, here in the Midwest, which is nice, but people would talk to you when you're walking down the street, and they would just be friendly, and that died. I don't think it was all COVID. I think a lot of it had to do with policies and Newsom's policies. I call him Gavin with the good hair, but, I think a lot of it was just this chilling effect. People wanted to feel safe, and so even the social people kind of became very, very comfortable with being alone and being cocooned and being virtual, not demanding much of others and not wanting to have much demanded of them. So there was also just a flattening of work ethic too, which was really sad for me and difficult for me as someone who thrives off other people's energy.
Yeah, that's something that gets me too is the acting, I started taking acting classes in 2005 down here, and it was just I never got with a group of people, Amanda, who ever treated me better
Yeah, yeah,
than those people.
yeah,
I could I it was amazing to me, and that's why I kept going back and taking classes. I said, yeah, but just because the people there treated me so well, it's actually, if you're a single guy also, it's actually a pretty good place to be.
yeah,
It's, because I say, well, I like to say there are 3 things that the women are usually above average in brains, they're above average in looks, and the 3rd thing is I said, "Well, they're so much more open-minded about age disparity."
oh yeah, oh yeah.
But
That's for sure.
anyway, but just great people, it's also because I've noticed because actors usually know 1 or 2 people who's in recovery, so if you don't
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that's another thing,
And they're always like, "Good for you," and I'm like, "I don't
yeah,
really." Yeah, yeah,
it's so really it was just and that stopped being a safe place.
yeah, yeah,
And it was so and I remember I called up one of the guys I've taken classes with, and he asked me, "Are you vaccinated?" And there are so many people I would just lie to about it. But I said, "I'm not gonna lie to these people because 'cause they've treated me so well," and that's the other thing too, is if I lie, it's not safe anymore.
mhm.
Yeah, just great people. I know Atlanta's becoming the new Hollywood.
That'd be
Uh,
great. I mean,
yeah,
I would love to see decentralized Hollywood. That would be fantastic. I think, when things get too centralized, they become very ossified, right? Because there's only so much change that a single central body can get hold of and implement. So I love seeing the decentralization of the film and TV industry. So I'm excited in that respect. But
yeah. Well,
yeah,
I've seen movies that I asked them, "What'd you make for this?" "Oh, about $5,500." And I said, "This looked as good as anything that would come out of the big studios."
yeah,
And it did. So and there's always been I think with people are I've noticed that actors still haven't quite jumped into that. The musicians jumped into it first. "I'll just release my own music," then the novelists did, but they still wanna go out to the film festivals that I just say, "Look,
yeah.
just go out and sell it yourself," and but it's still yeah, but it's but anyway, we're getting off the track here. But, so, yeah, that's another thing too, though. I think if you have an acting background, you'd definitely be good for this because we need more people who understand how to read the room, how to go out
Yeah.
and talk to the audience. I mean, Neeley, the former lead singer of the Rolling Stone cover band, I mean, I think that's definitely impacted his own success.
Oh, for
Yeah,
sure.
Mark Pellegrino would be great for the Libertarian Party, but he won't
Yeah,
touch it.
yeah.
He's an actor. He has a lot of Neeley qualities. But
Mhm.
so, what do you? One thing I've noticed too, Amanda, it seems like to me there are more and more people in this party who are focused more and more on how do we get the wrong people out than figuring out how to get the right people in.
Right. Yeah. That's I agree with you that that's a problem, right? Because for one thing, we've been hemorrhaging members. Like, obviously, there's every libertarian's got multiple libertarians probably with whom they disagree vehemently and think are bad for the party, bad for the movement, whatever. But I agree with you that the goal needs to be bringing people in. And the problem is that too often we have, in the interest of recruiting people, tried to change our party in order to make it more comfortable for them, as opposed to, you know, making it a place where they can discover libertarianism and trying to change their politics and influence them through their being in the party. We don't change the party, we try to change minds. And we do that through action. I'm a big believer, as you have probably realized, in direct action. I think that, and this goes back to my acting background actually, that I had a wonderful acting teacher who used to say, your brain doesn't know, your brain doesn't know that you're lying, basically. So that if you affect various emotions physically, you actually will begin to feel that emotion. If you act like you are crying, if you mimic what people do when they cry, you will actually start to cry. You don't have to be thinking about your dead dog. And the same thing applies when you are out there engaging in action and engaging in, efforts toward political change and activism, then you have a stake in the movement. And that's one thing that I really want us to be doing for recruitment and for visibility, is to get out there and start working, forming these single issue coalitions. And maybe we bring people over. I know that we will, because it's inevitable. Bring them over on the way.
I also think sometimes, churches do very well by getting people to do stuff, as opposed to asking for money. They'll ask you, "Okay, we're having a bake sale. Can you give us a cake?" And so
Mhm.
somebody will go bake the cake, and then church will raise money that way. But it often, I think sometimes when you just ask people, because there are people, to his credit, again, going back to Melee, the guy got so many volunteers and kids just getting out there doing stuff. It's
Yeah.
really amazing. And there wasn't a lot of money spent there. Although I don't know if they have the record keeping that we have here, but it's if you can get people to spread the word and just or make TikTok videos or upload videos or just
I
make
mean,
hats or make
the media environment is more egalitarian than ever before. This is a really on opportunity that we need to be taking advantage of. I absolutely agree with you.
yeah, and this brings me to the uh, I certainly, when it came down to the final, were you at DC last year
I
or
watched DC. I
okay,
I I watched it on YouTube, yeah.
it was, I mean, I went to that was really the first time I was voting for president, and I was in that I was in the weird position again. I was the 19th alternate from Texas, so
Okay, oh, wow.
I was sitting part of the time,
Yeah.
which sucks, but I ended up voting the whole day of Sunday, and people trickled out. I mean, I know Texas went down from 70 we went down from what, 76 people to 61 by the time it was over, because
Mhm.
people were and there were like 100 less votes on the final round. But when it came down to Recton, Wald, and Chase, I finally said, "Okay, Chase." I had voted for Tremont up until then, but and I don't regret that, but there was some I definitely think that Chase made should have made moved heaven and earth to get on some of those podcasts if those
Mhm.
people wanted him on.
Yeah.
And it was almost this type of virtue signaling on Chase's part. "Well, I'm not going to go on this podcast."
Yeah.
Culture war, he had to be in New Hampshire to fill out ballot access paperwork, but so that was a conflict that he couldn't really fix, but otherwise and you just have to, it's like, "Chase, these people got more Twitter followers than you do." It's, you know,
Yeah. I mean, it's you really, when you're trying down a platform, there should be a really good reason, right? I mean, I can't really think of anyone off the top of my head that I absolutely would not go on one of their shows. And I know a lot of people that I don't like. I know a lot of people that I disagree with. But yeah, I mean, you always want the opportunity to engage and, yes, to share a message with people who might not hear it otherwise.
I'm not sure if I would go on a show with Nick Fuentes. I mean, I can see
Fair,
that,
fair.
but yeah, there's
Uh,
a few people. I've thought about, because I've thought about that. Who will I not invite on my show?
Right.
And sometimes it's also there's a few people says, "Well, I don't know if I wanna invite him because he associates with so and so too much."
Mhm, mhm.
But because I've gotta protect my own brand.
Right, right.
But I'm pretty open on that, and, uh, my biggest list of never haves, though, are the people who I know who have misquoted people. I've said, "Okay,
Mm,
you misquote people, you're a liar." It's
right.
but
That's
yeah,
fair.
so but yeah, I do, yeah. But other than that, I think Chase did about as well as he could. He really was a he looked presidential and presented a good appearance, and
He was very good on message. He really was. Every time that I heard him, I was like, he has the talking points down. He doesn't ramble. In the past, I think we've had folks who are a little bit rambly and will go off on tangents and like, no, you keep it punchy. And Chase was good on that. He was very good on message. He was very good on keeping people engaged.
we have some people in the Libertarian Party that are very rambly, and that's occasionally I'll have these people on my show, and they'll go off on some tangents like, "Please shut up."
It's I try to work like because I know
Like,
I'm susceptible to it. And so I'm like, keep it in. Yeah.
and it's not even a tangent I really wanted to talk about, but I don't wanna just jump in and interrupt them, so I just kinda
Right.
let it go, but or send a message, but yeah, it's yeah, you have to know how to you have to make your message short, compact, concise enough. Uh,
Right.
Michael is a great guy in so many ways, but I politely said to him, "Michael, you use too many big words."
Well, I have that problem too. But
Yeah.
you know,
Oh, we have a
there
lot of people like that. I mean,
yes. Yeah.
and, I know I love to talk about Mealy, but that's another thing. I mean, Mealy could go into go into some ballroom where there's a bunch of PhD economics professors and talk
Mhm.
to them, and then an hour later, he can go out and talk to a bunch of plumbers and electricians about
Yeah.
economics as well, and
Yeah.
talk to them on a level that they both can understand. And we don't have that many people who can do that.
It's a skill for sure.
It's definitely a skill. So yeah, you posted this a while back, and I really thought this was on libertarian teen reactions in the Libertarian Party, and you talked about atomism. I don't
Pull
if
up
you
my
want
notes
to
here.
bring that up. Yeah, this was just
Absolutely.
this. I really thought this was a very insightful essay. So, sometimes I will bring people on here because of one tweet, and
Right.
this just showed a philosophical understanding that I don't put tweets out this long, but
I
yeah,
appreciate it. Yeah. I do I do write. I love writing and I love speaking. I do the words, as I say. One way that I've realized is of getting people's attention is actually that I'll put out these screeds on Twitter or whatever X, and people will read them, which is really fantastic. You don't have to go through an editor or publisher. I've done that too, and I'm sure that if I did, in some ways, my writing would be better on this. But um, yeah, I was really thinking hard about why we have certain problems with various members who, on one hand, seem to be kind of libertarian on certain issues, and then there seems to be this block, right? This blockage where they are very, very, and I didn't want to use the word socially conservative because I know a lot of people who are socially conservative and aren't reactionary and hostile toward people with other opinions and positions and lifestyles. Um, and I thought it's something more than edgelording. Like there's an actual position here that I want to tap into and analyze.
yeah,
And I did get some flack for calling for designating them libertine reactionaries, which I understand because there are people who call themselves libertines, and that's a whole other thing. I tried to be clear in using it as an adjective rather than a noun. It's not reactionary libertines; it's libertine reactionaries. And these are people who my main thesis was that there are some people in the Libertarian Party who are drawn to libertarian ideas because these folks don't want to be bothered, right? So they're very isolationist, they're very atomistic, they don't want to be bothered. And so they'll see a lot of libertarian positions that are all about, not being bothered and interfered with by the government. And they get behind that. But for them, individualism, self-ownership, those are not their principles. Their principles not being bothered, and then the individualism and self-ownership are means to an end. So when they encounter someone who has a different lifestyle or different beliefs or opinions, that bothers them too. and they don't want to be bothered by that either in society. So you have this disconnect between what they want to do in their life and what I would consider an equally libertine instinct to push away anyone with whom they disagree, but in a manner that is, that is very unlibertarian. I said in the piece, you have a right to isolate people from your communities. You have a right not to associate with people whose lifestyles you don't approve of. But if you're just doing that because you find them to be somehow, you know, other to you, that is not a libertarian position. And that's what I tried to get across, that it is the root of a lot of libertarian nationalism as well, and tribal collectivist instincts within the Libertarian Party.
I've noticed that, there I think, before coronavirus, there was often this cliche that everybody's a libertarian, they just don't know it yet.
Mhm.
And in 2020, a lot of us were thinking, well, everybody's an authoritarian and that they just don't know it yet. And I think now there's this there really is in the movement this attitude that there's a certain portion of the population that is just absolutely positively irredeemable.
Mhm. Mhm.
And a lot of libertarians would say that, about everybody in Los Angeles
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and everybody in San Francisco. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong because you do want to focus on winnable fights as opposed to fights that you probably can't. And I guess I should say arguments instead of fights, but so I do wonder sometimes if they're just more focused on. You can't focus on not arguing with certain people. You have to
Right.
figure out what you want to build, and but they also see some of these people in the LP, and then they're just thinking like, "Well, I don't want them here." It's
Right.
yeah,
And again, I think that we do in the Libertarian Party have a duty to do some ideological gatekeeping, right? Because otherwise, then there is no Libertarian Party. It is, you know, come in and have whatever beliefs you want. We do need to be defining who we are as libertarians and what we believe. But fortunately, we don't have to do that alone. There's a ton of literature, there's a ton of libertarian theory that can help us do that. And if there is an inconsistency between these ideals of individualism, self ownership, free will, and what someone is doing and saying and projecting, I think as members of a party that are engaging in this kind of gatekeeping and do have the right to free association, we have that obligation to make sure that our message is consistent. That doesn't mean that we don't associate with them outside of the party. That doesn't mean that we hate them or anything like that. But what it means is that we do need to set boundaries in terms of our ideology and in terms of our principles. Because again, otherwise, we don't have anything, right? Where I hate to use the phrase social club because that's become like almost a dog whistle for certain facets of the Libertarian Party. But we become just a hangout. We become rudderless.
that's true. Yeah, and there's always been certain people that I want to see them on stage speaking and representing us, and then there's some other people I'm just thinking, I'm glad you're here and you want to work with us, but don't ever put them on a stage.
Right.
Uh, somebody like James Weeks, for example,
Hmm.
unfortunately, but who will just, because you don't know what they're going to say. I do think there's probably a certain amount of misanthropy in the party, and that's, I probably and goodness knows I'm guilty of that as well, but
It's funny though, right? Because and again, this maybe ties in with the atomism, the isolationism a little bit. I am not an introvert. I am a raging, shameless extrovert, and I find it difficult because I'm very critical of what the things that people do. But I actually, as a concept, really love humanity and really love people. Um, and I find that that's my impetus actually for libertarian action is I want to create avenues and opportunities and eliminate barriers um, for people to express themselves and realize themselves and do creative things that are empowering and also empower others. Like I want human agency to be maximized. And that's why I do the work that I do as a libertarian. I think, again, there are others who wanna be left alone, and I appreciate that to the extent that it's useful when it comes to demonstrations, when it comes to protesting certain issues and types of government interference. But again, leave me alone isn't substantive enough for a political theory. It's predicating a political theory on a premise of inaction. It's a negative, leave me alone, don't do this. And I don't think you get a really viable political movement that way.
Yes, I don't, and it seems like to me it's a very snowflakey and almost being people who are looking to be offended. I think that's infected our society a lot. It's,
Mhm.
like, I mean, if I go out to the store and buy Pepsi, I'll go buy my Pepsi, but that doesn't mean but these are people who say, "Well, I didn't even wanna see Coke out at that store,"
Right.
which is a l so, well, maybe the people who drink Coke feel the same way, so you have this compromise and everybody and both sides are there. It more and more also, though, seeing this belief from some people, like, one guy I've had on my show several times, and I know he's a smart guy because I've talked to him enough, but he often just talks about saying things like neutrality is a myth,
Mm,
and that everything that's neutral will eventually be wokeified, and I'm just thinking like, "Where do you get this?" It's
mm, yeah.
and some of these people who now call themselves people say things like, "Well, you become a libertarian because you want to be left alone, but then you become something else when you find out they won't."
But see, that's the thing is that I didn't become a libertarian because I wanted to be left alone. I mean, I don't want government intrusion. But again, that's because I want voluntary social interactions. I want life and diversity and more than a little bit of chaos. Um, but I want a world that is more creative and more innovative, right? And I understand that freedom and being left alone, liberty and being left alone are actually at odds with one another because liberty demands some element of contingency, right? That there is
Contingency?
engagement with the unknown. Yeah, like the unknown,
Yeah.
things that you're not sure of. It demands engagement with that. It's about risk. It's about spontaneity, and you can't be spontaneous if you know everything. So I don't believe in completely being left alone, but what I do believe in is I believe in choosing one's own values, projects, initiatives, things that matter to you. And I don't think that anyone should be forced to apply their creative capacity toward anything, especially not something that's coercive like a state.
Yeah. Yeah, I this is but some people have this I I don't wanna pick I maybe picked on this one person too much. There's some people who have this view of libertarianism that libertarian just means I have more choices. So if one person can go to the grocery store and select from 10 brands of toothpaste and the other person can only find 5 brands of toothpaste, the person who has 10 brands has more freedom. I don't buy into that because I think it's a political concept. I mean, you're going to
Right.
choices are the result, but they're not necessarily the principle, but
That's a good point.
it's nice, and and strangely enough, I think some of those people, maybe why they fell for the COVID nonsense is because they were more utilitarian than, say, natural rights or moralistic
Mhm.
arguments. Well, these COVID restrictions might end up, saving lives. I mean, it's you know, I you were at Cato, Amanda. When I asked Jeffrey Tucker who disappointed you most in 2020, his first answer was Tyler Cohen, and
Yeah.
I said back to him, I said, "Well, Tyler Cohen's never really disappointed me," and uh, but then the second person he said, David Bose.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. So and such a great career, and I've come to the conclusion that a lot of good libertarians have had this jump the shark moment,
Mm.
and maybe that was his. So I'll just remember everything up through 2019 and forget the rest.
Yeah.
But
I mean, COVID was so odd, right? I think a lot of it, and maybe I'm being unfair, a lot of it seems to be this reaction, to Trump, right? There are a lot of libertarians, I'm one of them, who really doesn't like Donald Trump. And I think there was a tendency to see anything that came during the Trump administration as something terrible. And COVID to them was this cipher, it was this totem for everything that was viral and toxic about the Trump administration. So they jumped into that. And it became, I don't even think it was so much about COVID for them anymore. It was just a way of communicating their sense of disgust and contempt with the Trump administration and their notion of it as a metaphorical virus. Probably not consciously, but I saw some of that.
Yeah. Well, I certainly thought, there were a lot of horrible qualities in Trump, but I also could at least understand why he was, and Trump promoted the coronavirus as much as anybody did, and
Mhm.
amazing how his supporters completely forgot that.
Yeah, yeah,
And one key moment for a lot of people was when the I Jeffrey Tucker had a guy on his show one time, and he said one key turning point was, in Michigan when all those people showed up at the Capitol, and then Trump even put out "Liberate Michigan."
yeah.
And suddenly opposing coronavirus actually became associated with being a Trump supporter, which was so odd.
You're right. Yeah, that was before that. It was not that might have been the turning point. That people suddenly politicized it and made it into a Trump anti-Trump thing, which is difficult, I think, as a libertarian because you're like, I'm not on either of these people's teams, but you're seen as being one or the other.
Well, there was much more of this attitude that we were a third way, that we weren't
Mhm.
left or right, and
Yeah.
I don't know where that's come. I sometimes I wonder
S So, I mean,
if people are just so lazy that they don't wanna move beyond dichomatic thinking.
that's the thing. I don't like using the phrases left and right
Yeah.
libertarian. I do sometimes just because, like, it's the language that people speak, but I really try not to. When you look at the history of libertarianism and left and right, and I wrote a long thing about this, but right was traditionally like monarchism. It was a lot of government authority, and then left was, the furthest left was complete anarchy, right, or anarchism.
Mhm.
And this kind of got twisted around the point of the Russian Revolution, where you had this group that was ostensibly left, right? But then they came into power and they wanted to concentrate and centralize that power, but they still wanted to call themselves left. And so suddenly you get this economic dimension. Suddenly right and left are economic, which they really liked to play into because, they're Marxists and they're thinking that everything is economic. Everything is delineated that way anyhow. So all of a sudden, we got this completely authoritarian rendering of left and right, where suddenly it's all about economics. And if you want economic freedom or free enterprise or whatever, that makes you a rightist, which was not so much a thing before. Um, and if you want, because there are right
Yes.
wing capitalists, and there are, I would say, according to the original definitions, there are right wing communists, although that sounds crazy, right? It's authoritarianism. It's
Yeah.
authoritarian versus anti authoritarian. So, in that sense, libertarians would be left, but nobody likes that because they think of the economic dimension and they think that everyone who's on the economic left is a Marxist. Um, yeah, I'm with you. I don't like left and right because nobody uses it in the same way anymore, and I wanna move past that, but
But there's almost this assumption though too, if I say that I hate Coke, they'll say, "Well, you love Pepsi." I said, "No, maybe I hate both of them."
right, right.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's 7 Up and there's Dr. Pepper, it's so that's what I'm referring to. It seems like to me there's just strangely enough, I think the left has long been much more guilty of that. I mean
Oh, yeah.
they will not see the difference between John Monds and Richard Spencer, for example.
Mm,
Uh,
mhm.
you know, John Monds, the great African American libertarian, and Richard Spencer, the neo-Nazi.
Yeah, yeah.
They've always just everybody who's not me, there's we and there's they, and
Yes.
often there's a sometimes your enemy's enemy is still your friend, or is your friend, and sometimes your enemy's enemy is still your enemy. It's
Exactly. It's hard. And again, it gets to this really kind of Hegelian binaristic thinking where if you're not with us, then you're with them. And no, I'm with me and I'm with everyone else who's, you know, who's with one another. Um, but that's, everything has to be very, very tribal. And it's difficult when libertarians fall into that. That was another thing that I kind of elaborated on in the libertine reactionary piece is that there's this sense of tribalism because as a reactionary, you want to designate something other, right? You want to say, okay, I'm not that, that's my enemy. And in order to do that, then you have to have this tribe that is your group in order to remain atomistic and want to be left alone. You basically have to extrapolate your entire identity to the group. And then that is incredibly collectivistic, but it doesn't read that way to people who are in that way of thinking.
Yeah, well, there's also this thing that I call rebel signaling.
Mhm.
I will do something and show everybody how rebellious I am.
Right.
And that's the whole point. It's real and it or some people would also call it counterfeit individualism. You're not
Mhm.
you're just blindly rejecting the rules because you want to reject the rules.
Right.
Uh, I brought up the Anarcho Polko conference and I commented, that it was the most disorganized conference I'd ever attended. And somebody came back to me and says, "You can't expect us to follow arbitrary rules." And I said, "Yeah, well, you're right. I can't expect you to follow arbitrary rules, but when you publish a schedule, I expect you to stick to the schedule that you published
Right.
instead of just starting everything a half hour later and not
Right.
even trying to." It's and that's, but
Yeah.
for some people, and I'm often horrible with that too. I need to get better at that. But some people, it seems like showing up late is just their way of saying how rebellious they are. It's
Right.
no,
I
it's
mean, and that's arbitrary too. Direct that rebellion to something that feels meaningful and something that is going to, something that has an effect on society and on politics, right? Don't just be showing up late. I mean, people need to do more in the way of asking why they are doing what they're doing and becoming a little bit more critical in terms of in terms of introspection, in terms of developing self-awareness.
yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things there. I think when you're acting, you have to be really self aware
Mhm.
and of course when you see yourself on camera or at least even hear yourself on tape, it's definitely it has an impact on you
Yes,
in
it
ways that
does.
you
Yeah.
wouldn't have imagined yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, this is a you had Daryl Davis on last night. I
Yes.
really thought that was great. What did Daryl have to say? I mean, what do you think? I mean, could we get Daryl Davis into the LP?
I don't know. I mean, I think we told him, we talked a little bit about libertarianism after the show. We talked about some of the issues that we're having in the Libertarian Party, and I think it would be wonderful to have him do some mediation, because that is part of what he does is his work. I don't know if we could get him into the LP ideologically, but our connection, like the way that we booked Daryl was because we have someone in LP Alliance who's worked with him in the past on other things. In terms of activism and advocacy work. So there's definitely overlap. And in some of the things that he said, there was a lot of overlap. I think it would be fantastic to certainly have him on more, and if nothing else, just be doing work with him. And again, I think it would be great to have him do some mediation. He is obviously very big on seeing the individual, right? I mean, that's his
Yes.
huge thing. He doesn't like racial collectivism, and he's built an activist career on that. He's an incredibly talented musician. I think a lot of musicians are innately extremely individualistic. Uh, so there is a lot of overlap, and it would be cool. It would be cool to have him on again and to do more with them.
This is one thing here that, you were responding to this one phrase, nations require shared identity, values, and culture. So if that's required, then what's the point of having libertarianism in the first place?
Right. I
Uh,
mean,
what's the point of freedom of religion if everybody has to be a Methodist?
right. Yeah. Yeah, and I reject that nations have to have this shared set of beliefs entirely, right? Obviously, in the United States, a lot of people are part of the classical liberal tradition in one respect or another. But when you start talking about culture, that is a huge, huge concept. There's a lot that's baked into that. And to talk about a shared culture then that excludes other types of culture that are not related to whatever the state's putting down, or the nation is putting down, that is not libertarian. Um, yeah, I agree with you that especially with something that is as malleable as culture and ephemeral as culture, you can't talk about how a state needs to be built on this one uniform culture.
Well, and that's a very vague word. I mean, when the coronavirus stuff started, I actually went out and said, I said, no reconciliation is impossible is possible or desirable. I remember thinking, I said, I have no desire to live in a country with people who think that this is okay. And that really is, I think, a humongous difference. But uh, and there is
Yeah,
this feeling of, I can't change. Imagine you have a friend who's been an alcoholic forever, and you really work hard, and you want to help them, you want them to be healthy and clean and sober, but then eventually, you just hit that point and say, "I'm giving up.
uh-huh.
I hope they die pretty soon." That's sad, but it's true.
Right, right.
And
That was yeah,
you hope they don't have any kids.
right. That was the thing when I left California, it didn't feel like a permanent giving up, but it was certainly one of those points where I thought, I am doing worse for myself. I am able to do less because I'm here in California. And if California ever gets its act together, I really want it to, and I hope that it does. But it's not going to be with me working to save it. um, and yeah, you ultimately you need to do what's in line with your principles. And yeah, that was a period that really broke a lot of people in one direction or another.
I think people just got really angry, and that anger manifests itself in a lot of different ways. I just wish we'd all gotten angry when it would have been.
Yeah. And angry together, right? Because I think everyone was angry. But because there wasn't that drive, and this is what I keep coming back to, that was actually the point when I started studying collective action and started studying direct action and the problems with it, and especially the problems with getting libertarians involved in it, which are huge because I did see that hole, right? I saw that lack that we had. We're libertarians. We should be fighting this. Why can't we? Well, because we're libertarians. And it was really at that point that I started diving into all this writing and all this theory and history on various social movements, um, and trying to make sense of what we could use without compromising our principles, thinking about how to engage in collective action without forgoing our individualism. And fortunately, I came to learn through studying that decentralized movements do work the best when you can get them off the ground. And it's that entry stage that's really difficult. Individualism is the best way to build a direct collective action movement, but it's hard to start. And so that's one of the things that I've been working on is figuring out how to start and getting other people to start with me.
Yeah, I that's yeah, well, I see some things working independently. I remember this happened. Yeah, it's the cliche, you're trying to herd cats, and that's true. And but as Jeff Neal said, well, you have to treat them like cats. And you can't herd them if you treat them like dogs.
Right.
So maybe that's the issue. I do think that, but I think sometimes you do end up with people who can be some people whose messaging is problematic, and they
Mhm.
just do something that really is problematic. Like I don't like to talk much about, and I'll just, some of the tweets that come out of LPNH, I think are
Mhm.
they're damaging the brand
Yeah.
be really badly, and I don't know how we fix this. I mean,
Yeah, see, this is something else that I wrote about is that they don't have LP&H has no reason to care about, the LP brand independent of LP&H, right? Like, they have an amazing I hate to say it, they have if I were them, I would think I had a really good grift going, right? Because I could just ride off the back of the LP brand. I could use that branding, use that name recognition, and use that to bring all of these folks into my state that were kind of cast out of other areas of society. Say, hey, those base instincts that everyone else hates, they're welcome here. And so signal to them, right? They come in, they give me their dues money, they become a member of LP&H or the Free State Project, and I have no reason in that case to care about LP National because, like, they are doing their own thing. They have their own model. Ben Weir, the chair of LPNH, has since walked this back, but many times LPNH, their social media at least, has said that they don't care about the Libertarian Party nationally. Okay, well, if you don't care about the Libertarian Party nationally, then you're using the brand exploitatively and you're not part of this group, this associative group. So create something else,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and I realize, the Free State Project has its goals and the LPNH has different goals. I mean,
Mhm.
they have, they will say that they have, what, 40 people that they call libertarians in the state legislature, but none of them with the LP, which is fine.
Right.
If they're accomplishing that, I think that's great, but don't, don't do that under our brand. I don't understand that why. And there are lots and lots of people who go do good work under other organizations, whether it be the Marijuana Policy Project or Gun Owners of America, or I don't understand why do they want to use this brand and yet they don't seem to care about the party. I don't get it. I mean, the only thing I can assume is that they don't want that party to be successful. What else can I deduce from this?
I mean, they don't care, but what LP gives them is it doesn't they don't have to work hard to build their own organization. If they have one ready made, they're a state affiliate. Okay, well they stumbled into a gold mine. They can make money from dues. So why would they want to start something over if they already have the apparatus set up to make money and to function as an organization and to get clout and have a platform? Like it would be from a business standpoint for them for what their goals are, which are not aligned with ours. Their goals, it would be absolutely ludicrous for them to abandon the libertarian brand. For us, it would be ludicrous not to consider the fact that they have no reason to care about LP National. They have absolutely none, and they've signaled that very clearly.
Yeah, and some people want to talk about disaffiliating, but that's not going to change the Twitter account, and people are still going to see that Twitter account, and they're not going to know that they've been disaffiliated. They're still going.
They
So as
wouldn't
long as they're able to use all that, it's
they wouldn't be able to use the phrase libertarian party. It would have to be something else. It would have to be like New Hampshire Libertarians or something to that
okay. Yeah,
effect. They would not be able to use that branding.
okay. That's good to know. I
Yeah.
don't know where. Yeah, it's. I don't really want to get into a lot of lawsuits, but there's
Right. Right.
we already have that group. The people who are working on what they call the Liberal Party now,
Mhm.
and I'm just thinking, why would you call it that? But
Yeah. It
is
it
that
it it
that word is just so damaged.
it kind of had its heyday. People were trying to make it's, like trying to make fetch happen. People were trying to make classical liberal happen again, but not all libertarians are classical liberals. Like that is a distinct tradition, right? With which some libertarians don't identify. And so then to say, okay, we're all classical liberals. Well, no, actually, we're not. And in fact, a lot of the European libertarians that preceded us were not classical liberals. It's fine if you are, but that's not the sum total of who we are. The other issue with the Liberal Party, and you know, this will get me in trouble, is that they are explicitly moderates, right? Like they're attempting to be political moderates. This is First of all, there are several studies and paradoxes that show that moderation, like you don't pull people to the center if you have a center group or a center candidate. But also, it's not an era for moderation. It's not an era for moderation strategically. People don't care about moderate messaging. And it's also not an era for moderation normatively. I think there are things that we should be outraged about. I'm in the radical caucus. There are a lot of things that we should be radical about. Uh, so for me, I can't get behind this notion that if we all behave like centrists, everyone will become rational again. That is kind of a classical liberal idea, but
Yeah.
I don't buy it.
Yeah, there's and, I hate that. I hate that term, first of all, because, "Oh, classical, what's that mean?" "Oh, that means you're old, antiquated, you're a has-been."
Right. I That's what I hate too.
And so few people you're one of the few people in the LP I've talked to who understands that.
Yeah.
My
I mean,
ideas used to be popular, but they aren't anymore. And
yeah.
people just look and say, "Well, why should I get involved?" I mean, because of Milei, I've said, "Let's call it rock star liberalism," which sounds really cool, it's
Yeah.
but, because the word liberal still hasn't been totally ruined in a lot of other places, but it has
Right.
here. And
Well, and
and I
classical
love the word liberal. I mean, Liber,
leader, yeah.
I mean, the root is obvious, but it's been totally corrupted there, and not to mention, you're right about the whole moderation thing, though. That's just
It's
I
not the time.
I think one area where where a lot of these people have failed, Amanda, is that if you put and I use this example on the last show. Let's say you got, one person who likes Coke, one person who likes Pepsi, and you lock them in a room for 6 hours, they're going to come out of that room 90% of the time more convinced that their position is correct.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah,
Even they really are. It does happen that sometimes these people change their mind, but most of the time it doesn't.
yeah.
No matter how long they sit down and talk, and uh, there's
And
this double back. They even call it the backfire effect. Is when people are presented facts contrary to what they believe, they'll reject them and then be more convinced that they're correct. It's really amazing. I don't know what causes that, but it definitely happens with politics.
well,
Yeah.
that's I think a lot of it is human, and I like this. We all kind of have this rebellious streak, right? And this is what we use to individuate ourselves. So it's really important to have that sense of rebelliousness, that sense of questioning. Well, why would I do this? Why would I do that? That's kind of how you forge an identity. Is asking that. Do I want to buy into that? Well, no. Okay. Well, why? Or yes. Well, why? Um, this is also where as much as I love talking and writing, I reject the idea that I can just go in and have a rational conversation with someone and convince them that I'm right. Very, very rarely happens. And that's why I go back to the fact that you need to get people engaged and involved in action, because once again, then they're actually performing the ideas. They're performing them. And that actually, if you study psychology and neural rewiring, that rewires the brain. It creates new patterns and pathways. You need to get them participating in things and in activism. And this is one of those areas where the LP really needs to be doing more. Another thing that I get in trouble for, that we can't only be about candidates, we have to be about causes. Because if we only campaign for a person every 2 to 4 years, right? Then we're coming up and we're going away again. We're a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
We don't get that earned media because we're such a small name. We need to be doing that stuff in the off years that are giving us visibility so that by the time we have that candidate coming out, people know the word libertarian, they know what it means, they know the causes that we back.
Yeah. And if the party had really come out against the coronavirus stuff, I think it maybe could have been a really amazing time. We tend to, I think, overemphasize what missed opportunities are, but who knows? It's just, and now I think it's probably the failure of the party to act's probably hurt them because a lot of people are saying, "Well, what's this about? If it's not about fighting this, it's." And
Right.
as I've asked other people before, I said, "Well, if somebody like Anthony Fauci can't unify us, will anything ever unify us?"
You know, I think yes. I think that that was a really golden opportunity because it would have allowed us to speak to multiple sectors of society, right? Because you had like small businesses, you had stay-at-home parents, you had students, you had workers, everything. But we have that again, fortunately or unfortunately, depending, with the Trump tariffs, with with all these various offenses that the state is currently committing with this new mass surveillance stuff that's being proposed with Palantir, which is terrible because I think that's also the name of the really creepy thing in Lord of the Rings, like the creepy, I don't know, like ball or something that with the all-seeing eye. But maybe that's
I think
Palantir. I'm
that's
not
where it
sure.
comes from. Yeah,
Yeah, like, it's crazy that they would do that. Um, but yeah, so there are always these opportunities that can unify disparate groups and disparate spots of society. But we need to be rising to that because no, usually these opportunities come and go. And this needs to be a time where we actually lead because something's going to happen. And I've said this on, on LP Alliance business list. Something's going to happen. And I want us to be leading it
yeah,
because if we don't, I don't like any of the other options for who's going to lead this next movement that's coming.
yeah, it does. I mean, I wonder. I think some of the surveillance stuff, which I've had people talk about, is going to be an issue. I don't really know what some of these factions want. It's hard to say. I mean, you were never really. Were you ever really involved with the Mises Caucus, or
No, no, I was not. I mean, I knew of the Mises Caucus. I actually, some of my very close friends early on in the Libertarian Party were Mises people. And in the strange twist of fate, I was endorsed by the Mises Caucus when I ran for secretary in LP Wisconsin, but that's another story. Yeah, I was never a member of the Mises Caucus, but I did watch them very closely because I saw what they were trying to do, and I understood what they were trying to do, and I didn't think they were doing it well. Um, my my thought was always that they really didn't have the political awareness to pull off what they were trying to pull off. Um, and so I kind of watched them with curiosity, but never quite got involved.
I'm not sure what you mean. They didn't have the.
What I so they wanted to reform the Libertarian Party. They wanted to change it, right, because of the COVID stuff, where they thought that people were too
Yeah,
inactive, and I agree with them there. Everyone there. Um, so they wanted to create the sea change in the Libertarian Party, but the way that they did that was through non-ideological recruitment for the most part, where they just kind of took loyal foot soldiers. And they didn't provide a whole lot of holistic education in terms of libertarianism. They bussed people in to take over conventions without actually telling them what libertarianism was. So you wound up and who are the kinds of people that that strategy appeals to? Well, it's a lot of disaffected folks who are on the outs politically, and at that time, the disaffected folks who were on the outs were Republicans typically, or people who leaned right, conservatives, who felt like this COVID stuff had become politicized and who were angry with the Biden administration as well when that finally took off. So the Mises Caucus is trying to recruit people who feel like outcasts politically. A lot of these folks tend to be extremely right wing, as we might say, and they brought them into the Libertarian Party, told them you have a home here, didn't actually give them any education on what libertarianism is about.
yeah.
So we wound up with this chaotic mess of people who didn't know about libertarian messaging, but were supposed to do whatever they were told from up high. And the caucus became simultaneously very rigid and regimented, but also not very coherent in terms of an actual ideology on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wondering what the Mises Caucus stands for, and the only principle I really can find is we've all got to praise Ron Paul and say he's the greatest American who ever lived. That seemed to be, there was an alleged tweet that Chase sent out, and that seemed to be the main damning indictment. And the Libertarian Party has never. It's never required that you be loyal to a certain guru. It's
Mhm,
If you can say, I don't like Mises or I don't like Hayek or I don't like Ayn Rand, the party's always been open on that. But this is the one group that says, "Oh, you have to like Ron Paul." It's
mhm.
sometimes I wonder if the Mises Caucus is just game to make people hate Ron Paul. It's
Oh,
weird,
man. I
but,
hope not.
yeah,
Um,
I knocked on doors for Ron Paul in 2008. I'm glad I did. I met some good people. I met some good people who also call themselves Ron Paul Republicans. It's,
mhm.
the one thing they forget is he really didn't have that much of an impact if you look at the grand scheme of things, but
He didn't he got a lot of people interested in libertarian ideas, and I think that's great,
yeah,
but other than that,
yeah,
the liberty movement is never about one person, and there's this cult of personality
yeah.
where he's been kind of reified, and I don't like that for anyone. Um, I like the ideas, but when it comes to cults of personality, I'm not into that. I think that's how he gets states.
But sometimes it seems like personality cults are the only things that bring people in, though. It's so
Yeah,
weird, though. It really is. I mean, certainly, Javier Milei,
mhm,
uh, huge, Ayn Rand, I would point out that what people don't realize is, and granted, I wasn't living in Texas, but Ron Paul had help from Nolan Ryan when he initially got back into Congress,
yeah,
and Nolan Ryan is a god in Texas. I mean,
mhm,
I mean, would he have gotten back in without Nolan Ryan's help? I don't know, but you have the major celebrity helper.
yeah.
I've often suggested too that the LP should try to go after certain celebrities, but they don't ever seem to be interested in doing that, if nothing else. And maybe I should just go out and write a letter myself.
You should. I mean, like, honestly, be the change. Be the
Yeah.
change you wish to see. Um,
I guess I like to ask though if somebody else say, well, if I try to make is somebody else on board with me on this, and I almost never hear back from them. So it's you know, and maybe it would help more. You're in Wisconsin. I said let's try Aaron Rodgers because he
yeah,
actually does have a lot of libertarian sympathies, and
yeah,
once he
yeah.
gives up football, he's going to want something else to do.
That is true, that is true. Yeah, no, and that's a good idea. I don't know, maybe some of the wariness that you're encountering is a fear of that cult of personality kind of taking over, and, okay, well, then this one famous person becomes the movement. I don't think that's a reason not to recruit someone.
That's
Um, I don't think that's a reason to say, we shouldn't try to bring this person in the movement. I mean, uh, eh, star power is star power. It means something. I think one thing, because you mentioned Melier, I one thing that he does, even though he has what you would call a cult of personality, I think that's fair, is he's always talking about the literature, right? Like he's always talking about the ideas. It's not just about him. He's telling people,
yeah.
he's telling his audience, look into this. This is important. And I mean, if you have that kind of platform, that's what you should be using it for. So I support that.
Yes, they're really he really is, and he really is about the ideas. That's what's and this is what I think is so amazing about Milei. I think he really is engaging in this philosophical re-education
Mhm.
that is so necessary, and 70% approval with voters under 30. It's just so it's phenomenal to see what's happening there. And part of the reason why I've gotten so interested too, Amanda, is I don't have a lot of faith in this country anymore.
Mm.
And if I yeah, I see that, maybe as a possibility of somewhere else to go. It's that's something. There are a lot more than you think libertarians who have just given up on America.
Yeah. And that's what is so distressing, to me, is that I think we have the framework, more than a lot of other places to have a libertarian renaissance. It's again, I think that because that framework is there, maybe people don't get a sense of the urgency because, if people are being oppressed all the time, then there's
Yes.
really that sense of urgency. But when it's vague and subtle, people are kind of happy in their little boxes, right? And I think that we can't give up on where we are, um, because then we don't get anywhere that we wanna be. I do see a lot of potential in the American psyche, if you wanna call it that, because we really have a unique history. Even people who are new to this country and uh, who don't know about that American history, it's baked into a lot of the way that we do things. We have always we America came about as the product of a revolution, right?
Yes.
And there is a sense of grit and a sense of ingenuity and a desire to do better and innovate that I have not seen to this extent in any other country. So I think the raw materials are here partly because of like the material conditions in which America was founded. Um, and I think that's stuck with us. That's baked into some of our institutions, but it gets glossed over. There definitely needs to be some kind of rebirth in terms of libertarian ideas. There need to be major changes. I like it. I love it, in fact, when I see other countries getting on board with these ideas. Like, I love what's going on in Argentina. Um, and I love seeing the other libertarian parties all around the world who are fighting, like in Georgia and in Russia. Uh, I think we need to be working more with them too, and developing solidarity with them, because this is a movement that is, that demands that we act where we are, but is also bigger than any one place. So I don't know. I would encourage a more holistic approach, I guess, where don't give up on America, but also don't only focus on what's going on in America, which it doesn't seem like you are.
Yeah, that's another thing that's happened too, ever since the Reno reset, and I remember Mikhail Svetov, who's the very well,
Yeah,
he was very much in favor of the Reno reset, and then now he
yeah,
is so he is so opposed to them now.
yeah.
I don't think a lot of the libertarians know that LP what's happened with LP National lately has pissed off a lot of people worldwide. It's just they're really
Um,
burning their bridges there too. It's for various reasons, but uh,
we've got to do more.
you know,
Yeah.
I do think it depends on what people's needs are. It's some of the I think some people go to these countries, number one, because possibly if you're, yes, for example, in Colombia or Mexico, it's easier just to bribe your way out of trouble.
Mhm.
And yeah, so you can kind of do whatever you want in a way, which I don't think a lot of libertarians want to do that, but it's uh and of course, because some of these countries are cheaper and uh you know uh I know another guy who's very libertarian, but he says, he's in Mexico, and you know what he said to me? He said, "Well, if we get a divorce, my wife gets nothing."
Yeah.
So, so yeah, uh, I have to say that's certainly really high on my list of why I've got negative about America, and also the entire culture of safetyism and uh, you know. When I was growing up, say under 10, I had friends, who had broken arms, and they'd go to the hospital, get it set, and they'd leave.
Yeah.
Now, kid goes into the hospital with a broken arm, they're gonna question that kid for 3 or 4 hours,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that to me is just something that's almost a non-negotiable for me. I don't wanna it depends on what your priorities are.
Yeah. I'm a lot of that too is a product of further enmeshment with the state, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there's so much there's so much collusion and entrenchment between the medical system in particular and the government. So this is one of my favorite slash least favorite fun facts about the Affordable Care Act is that it eliminated the opportunity for doctor-owned hospitals. So you can only have corporate hospitals. And this is, Obamacare. This is supposed to, and I mean, it completely makes sense if you want a nationalized system, but you're just getting the same thing under different branding, only with absolute monopoly as opposed to, cartel organizations popping up. So yeah, a lot of that is
yeah.
just the product of collusion between the state and the markets.
Yeah, I often wondered about that during COVID, if that was what they were trying to do. They were trying to consolidate the hospital industry. I mean, get to the point where uh, yeah, you go back 80 years, every bank was maybe 1 or 2 or 3 banks, and they were all
Yeah,
in one town, and there were no, there were, and now you have 5 or 6 big banks,
yeah.
and I think they've been trying to do that with hospitals, and
I,
I
I
definitely think COVID was part of that. They wanted to bankrupt these small town hospitals so somebody could swoop in and buy them up. It's
It's so frustrating because I am one of those people who genuinely I mean, I'm a big proponent of, of worker self-ownership, right? And workers' rights, things like that. And you don't get that with this kind of consolidation of industry. Like it just becomes more and more mammoth and the individual becomes less and less important and less powerful. And that is one of those things that's so painful to me because it's one of the areas where I don't see Republicans or Democrats, speaking in the right way, caring about the right stuff when it comes to that. That really upsets me and scares me because the rhetoric and the way of thinking and the values are just so off of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the rhetoric has definitely changed. I there's you have this. It seems like one of the big problems too is you have this concept, these anti-rights, as I call them.
Mhm.
Rights are political concepts, and they're about what people will not do to you.
Right,
They're not about what you get from other people. But
right.
it's like, and somebody pointed out, he says, I have the right. Says I have the right to own a gun. Said, yeah, you do. Says, well, I don't want. I want the government to pay for my guns. Says that's not what we mean. I says, so that's how rights work. But you
Yeah.
see this double standard with guns. There are things too that I do think there's still very much a culture of unschooling here, which I think is helpful, and the gun culture. I mean, as much as I hear about all the violence happening in France or countries like that, I said, if you had 2 or 3 Kyle Rittenhouse incidents in France, all of those people would calm down really fast.
Quite possibly. Yeah. Yeah.
But they don't want that to happen there. They wanna try to pretend that everything's going to be free. The armed society being a polite society is true. Uh, where, what what do you plan on doing for 2026? I mean, what do you think's gonna change there? What do you hope to accomplish between now and then?
Well, I mean, for the LP, which is a huge focus of mine, I want us to be electing a multi-caucus slash caucus neutral slate at Grand Rapids 2026. We call it the Grand Rapids Revolution because you have the arena reset, so we have to make it catchy and fun. Grand Rapids Revolution. But I'm working and we are working at LP Alliance in building stronger and more effective libertarian parties in all the states first, and then getting to that point where national can be kind of that nexus of coordination and action that allow states to really have an impact. I would like to see us working more on, as I said, reaching out to libertarian counterparts worldwide. This is one of those things where I don't know how much LP National is willing to do or able to do here because of their limited resources and maybe limited desire. But
Yeah,
as for what we're doing, we want to be organizing demonstrations. We want to be aligning on single issue coalitions with other folks in minor parties and outside of politics, right? Not compromising our principles, working together toward causes. And again, I think forming that international base of libertarians worldwide is going to be really powerful, especially in the coming years when things become more and more and more globalized, when there becomes more and more global attention all around the world. Uh, we're going to need to have a global community that can work and fight together. So that's what I want to see at least LP Alliance doing. And hopefully, hopefully we can get a national committee that's also going to help us in that eventually.
sometimes there can be differences. I think Milei has probably put a lot of the spotlight on, uh, on Argentina, certainly, because it's so because nobody's come close to what he's doing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not even close, and it's funny how yeah, the thing about me, I think he gets angry, but he still likes people. He knows
Mhm.
how to be edgy without being scary, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw his one clip, but he their equivalent of Anthony Fauci died last October,
Okay.
and Milei called him "hijo de puta." You know what that means?
I know what pizza means.
Son of
What's the rest of
whore.
it? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
there we go, there we go.
I mean, it
I
was
love a
so,
good one.
yeah, it's so that really, we weren't certainly wouldn't have heard that here. It's, I think there's a I don't know if you ever heard Judd Weiss, and I should get the clip, but Judd Weiss said the Libertarian Party seems to be the convenient quarantine pen for the most toxic elements of the liberty movement. And I said, "You're not wrong."
Yeah, but I think we've got really, really bright, and savvy people here, and I wanna see us utilizing that. The liberty movement is great because, again, like I said, it's decentralized. It sure as heck is decentralized. We have all of these nodes of action without anything to connect those spokes, and what I would love to see the party doing is helping form those connections so that we can talk with one
Yeah.
another, coordinate with one another. This is not a time to stay in our corners. It's really not. We cannot afford to do that right now, not with what's going on in the country, not with what's going on in the world. We need to be acting together, and that doesn't mean giving up our individuality. It means using that individuality to affect change in the world. It's an amazing thing, but the LP, I think, has a really great opportunity to be that kind of that nexus, that mechanism of information sharing, coordination. It's gonna take a lot of work, but again, we do have the apparatus to make that happen.
I do think also, if you're familiar with the Jim Collins book, Good to Great, he says, you need the right people on the bus, but you also need the people in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah,
And I think we definitely have a lot of people in the wrong seats.
that's fair.
That means they're good people, but they're not doing what is necessarily suited to their talents and abilities.
Right.
And we kind of say, well, we want you to be free, but it's like, yeah, but I mean, there are people that, you being from California, and I've talked about this. I know I beat dead horses, but we had 9, 10 people running for president.
Oh, yeah.
3 of those people running for president were from California, but we couldn't get any of those same people to run for governor in 2022.
Mhm.
And I'm just looking at myself saying, "Why is this happening?" That would have been less work for them, and that would have been money better spent, to at least have one of them running. And people want to do their own thing, but sometimes they're really not. I mean, I'd like to see Jacob Hornberger try to, instead of running for president, try to work in the LP, like maybe beyond the LNC or something like that. I
Mhm.
think he'd be better served. His talents, not to mention, I believe he's fluent in Spanish, and
Oh, wow, yeah.
he could do a lot of he could do Spanish speaking outreach. So we have these people just do it. Karen Ann Harlos, I think, is doing about her talents are being best utilized where
I think so, yeah. I mean, she's great, she's great.
she really goes for that Robert's Rules stuff, and not everybody does. But it she's in the right seat, and you know
She's been there for a while, which is good. And been in the party for a while, which is good. Yeah, I think just in terms of strategy, people kind of have an allergy to the notion of a strong party in the Libertarian Party, which I get. But again, that doesn't mean weak people. Strong parties need strong people, and a strong Libertarian Party makes its members strong. In order to make the rest of society strong and individualized. Um, and yeah, we need to have more of a strategic arm and more of a strategic plan. We need to have an intellectual arm and a way of transmitting thought, right? And a way of getting ideas out, not just older literature, but also we've got amazing new thinkers in the LP from all areas of libertarian thought. One thing that we're doing in LP Alliance is we have a movement journal that we're getting back online called The Torch, and that's one thing that we want to be doing is we want to have that, that intellectual center that is going to be able to talk about big libertarian ideas, but also, run of the mill party news, and suggestions for policy in and out of the party. That's the kind of thing we need to be doing too, because that can also unify the liberty movement writ large. So we've got a lot of work to do, but again, we have the people who are willing to do that work. And that's what makes me excited.
Yeah, we do. I think also sometimes people become more connected when they do the work instead you just yeah, by the way, I often say that I'm the last of the libertarians who got his libertarian education from book catalogs.
Oh, wow, yeah,
But
yeah.
but also, when I first got mail from the Libertarian Party, one of the thing I got was, I got this page with books.
Mhm.
You should read these books. And if the LP would put something on the web, all these different organizations put something on their websites and saying, okay, and maybe have members submit reviews, and then you can do an Amazon affiliate link. And every time somebody buys that book on Amazon, the LP gets a kickback. One thing I do need to point out with regard to educational organizations is these organizations often are 501(c)(3), so they do
Mhm.
not to get involved with politics. They can't. I mean, uh, that one nice lady who works for ARI, who is from Argentina, I she usually talks about immigration and what it's like, trying to be an Argentine trying to immigrate to America. But I emailed her once. And I said, "Hey, do you want to talk about this guy in Argentina?" And she says, "I can't endorse political candidates."
Oh, yeah.
Now, I think ARI probably puts a gag order on some of these people, but still, I thought that was kind of, I said, well, you're from the country, you've got to know something. But, so
Right.
that kind of ended that. So there, a lot of organizations do not actively get involved in politics because they are 501(c)(3) and they can't, which I
Well,
think is unfortunate. Maybe there's a lot of reasons why we need to. One thing I'm realizing too is just how many regulations and stuff there are on these parties and just how hard it is to
yes.
do things, period.
That's something that we are learning in real time at LP Alliance. And so this is something that we've noticed is that, um, I'm one of those libertarians who doesn't like hierarchy a whole lot. I know that Hoppians really love it. Um, but I the structure, like the regulatory structure for how you need to form an organization, how you need to form a business, how you need to form a pack is forces you to at least nominally have some kind of, hierarchy on paper.
Yes.
And that prevents people from ever being able to think outside of that box, right? Where it's like, well, even in my private life, I'm organized hierarchically, even in my, but that's because in a lot of respects, I'm not talking about the family unit, but in a lot of respects, that is regulatory. Like that's imposed via regulation to make you think in that very, very linear way. Um, and it makes it very difficult to be holocratic or anything else. But Eh, yeah, that's one thing that we've been laughing about in LP Alliance is just, that it's so baked in. It's so baked into the way that our government runs things. So of course, it forces you to think that that a very, very strong centralized government is necessary if they're also forcing you to do that in other voluntary organizations.
Are you familiar with holacracy?
Yes. I love the look
I,
on your
the
face.
first time in the LB I've heard somebody use that word, and I know, yeah, I know some people swear by it. I'm not sure how that works out in practice.
It depends.
Amanda, unfortunately, I'm really starting to wonder if the incentive structure of nonprofits is conducive to getting anything done. Uh,
It's hard. Um It depends on how the board is run, I think. This is one of the problems where people have heard me rant about Robert's rules. I think one of the difficulties with Robert's rules and other forms of parliamentary order is that it's kind of designed to keep things at the status quo level, and like keep things running along smoothly. Whereas if you want to affect change, things can't always be running smoothly. Like you need to have kind of eruptions. But yeah, to your point, nonprofits, there are weird incentive structures there, and I say this as someone who's worked for nonprofits. It's just it it's difficult. It makes it difficult to, to create that coordination between them too, and it's possible, but it makes it more difficult to actually create an activist network.
yeah, I remember Angela tweeted about her experience at the Bitcoin conference, and I said, "Well, Angela, they're all business people,
Mhm.
so they're and it's the structure." I've really wondered, and this is somewhat Hobbesian, but with that organizations are always going to have higher time preference, and they're just not going to be thinking long term. I mean, oh, 2021 sees people kick Karen Ann Harlos off the LNC, which largely enables the Reno reset, and they don't even
Mhm.
think that about that. Then Karen Ann Harlos, the Mises Caucus gets mad at her because she did her job, and now the people who kicked her off the LNC are now, some of them at least, are now rallying around her again. This makes no sense to the outside observer. It's
Politics is strange. Yeah, and it does. I agree with you that, you know, y people need to reorient their time preference in order to think about second and third order effects, which a lot of times folks don't, especially in the LP. Um, but, again, it's possible. It's one of those things that we just need to be cognizant of. Like, we need to understand, okay, what are the vulnerabilities here? What are we subject to as a political organization, as a political party? What are the traps? And how do we avoid them? So that is gonna take a more long-term plan and a more long-term vision, but that doesn't mean sacrificing spontaneity and independence. It's creating that ground for that spontaneity and independence to flourish and do it more and do it in a more effective way.
yeah, that's one way to look at it. I mean, letting people flourish. It's uh, you know, I do think sometimes that people in the party can be very, they don't really take criticism well, even if it's in good faith.
Right, right.
Uh, and it's just, or even disagreement. I mean, I've had some absolutely ridiculous arguments in the party, and just sometimes I just walk away because I realize how ridiculous they are. It's
It's hard, right? So we talk about being a party of principle, and we are, but that means, I said this a lot, that means that we disagree on policy because we have these principles and then we rationalize different policies from the same place. Uh, when people when people see other people's opinions about their ideas as a reflection of their opinions about them, then it becomes hard. When instead we start seeing our ideas as avenues for play and avenues for other people to work as much as ourselves, that I think changes the playing field and makes it easier to engage and to criticize and to argue in good faith. I never like criticize. I mean, I'll criticize people on the basis of their policies, right? On the basis of their
yeah.
suggestions. And I'll talk about how I don't hate anyone in the LP. I really don't. Um, there are certain strategies that I find ludicrous. There are certain things that people say and do that I hate. But when you start at, when you go after the idea on its own merits and you understand that if someone's critiquing your idea, it's on its own merits, then you kind of have this other thing which is separate from you and you're both working on it together, which is, I guess, the type of discourse that I'd like to see in the party.
Well, this has happened a couple times on Twitter, and I recently adopted this rule of no arguments with people who have less than 400 followers, uh, and that helps.
Yeah.
But I've had this has happened twice now where somebody's come up and said, "I'd like to get a Free State project going here," and I like, "Do you understand what the Free State project is?" And it doesn't. The whole idea is you get as many libertarians as possible to move to New Hampshire, and then they take over New Hampshire. And I recently got into it with somebody who seems like a good activist. Says, "I want to start one in Arizona," and I'm just like, "This is a horror." And I never, but I said, "No, don't do this because so you're going to take, so you want to take libertarians away from New Hampshire, which is what you're inevitably going to do." It's
Mhm.
you know, and I even said, Arizona is a bad choice anyway because it's the 14th in population.
Yeah.
It's not a small state. Well, yeah, but I live here. I said, "Okay, you live here." Well, and it's like, do whatever you want, but just don't work against the Free State project that we have. It's
Well,
and
it's
yeah,
inherently kind of centralized, right? Because you want to again, I can tell you, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you from studying history, when you
yeah.
consolidate a bunch of libertarians and or anarchists in one place, it doesn't go well. Um, so Yeah, I believe in decentralization in terms of
Yeah,
making ourselves dispersed, but again, then we're working together from multiple areas to create something that is nationwide, worldwide.
but I think you understand what the free you do understand what the
Yes.
Free State
Yeah,
Project is.
yeah, yes.
You have a low population state, so it's easier for a certain and the whole idea is that you can concentrate and make your efforts go here, and,
Mhm.
it's and not to mention, you also have a state where the legislators in the bigger house represent less than 4,000 people.
Right,
So it's
right.
not hard at all to get elected to the state legislature. So that's another that's I mean they end up with it that way. So that's how they're and I think the whole idea is also is you create this libertarian paradise where there's uh, New Hampshire is a very free state by
Mhm.
comparison.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I think they are accomplishing a lot of what they accomplished there, but says, okay, so now you want to take somebody else away. That's just what and so you can work on things that aren't where I'm fine with you doing what your own thing, but if you're doing something that actively works against somebody else,
yeah,
that's where I draw the line, and that's why I said so now you're going to create a second free state project and possibly pull people away from New Hampshire, and but it just got onto this, and it's like this person isn't going to change your mind. Yeah,
yeah.
and so sometimes it's not even over politics.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too is, I prefer arguing about politics or at least theories of politics, but yeah, people can get, offended over very strange things,
Well,
especially online.
I remember in a Signal group, somebody mentioned, when Chase was in New Hampshire to fill out his paperwork for ballot access there, the person who coordinated that whole effort said, "Well, I could have called ABC and had them out here." And I came back to him and said, "I think you mean the local ABC station.
Mhm.
I don't think you mean ABC.
Yeah, yeah,
There is a difference." But he was like, "Well, I have a direct line to that person." I didn't say, but yeah, but what I mean is you're not gonna call up ABC and have whoever ABC's nightly news guy come there, but yeah, you might get somebody from the local station. That's great. But suddenly it turned out, and I just realized I'm out of here. This is too stupid.
yeah,
It's like, why don't you just admit that I'm right? I'm right and you're wrong about this. No, it's
yeah.
and when you have these
Again,
yeah,
when people see their ideas as themselves, it becomes very difficult to have a good faith discussion. When people put their ideas again kind of in between themselves and whomever else, then it becomes its own entity and
yeah,
you're both working to improve it.
yeah,
And that's really the only way to get actual actually effective politics done.
yeah.
That isn't just trying to win.
When you get
But
into an art, over like that, just uh, to her credit, Angela had and I think it'd be a fantastic idea. Maybe you could do this LP and lights. She says, "I want to have a roast."
oh yeah, oh yeah. No, that'd be great. I mean, we do that already every day in the group, but yes, a formal roast would be amazing. It'd be a great fundraiser.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great thank you, thank you, thank you. And what I finally said, a lot of people here, I don't think they don't seem to understand what roasts are. I said, "Well, roasts are mean spirit." I said, "No, you're mean spirited." It's like I said, they're too just tone deaf to get that a roast is supposed to be fun, that it's not serious. It's
Yeah. I
uh,
mean, you have to have the right person. You have to have the right target for the roast, right? Because it's got to be someone who is going to take it in good faith. And
Mary Ruwart would be a great. That's the first person I thought of. Let's roast
yeah,
Mary Ruwart. God bless her. She'll just laugh, and people can say funny things, and uh,
that'd be fantastic. Yeah. And again, you got to have the right people too who are doing the roasting because they
yeah.
can't be too timid either, right?
Yeah, but you realize it's just all play acting, it's not
Mhm.
real.
Right, right.
You're all just playing roles, and once it's done, it's done.
I think having a
I
roast,
should have known you'd appreciate that just because you've been with actors and you understand you go in here and it's all role playing and you
right?
do it and you come out and, you watch some of those roasts, they're just so hilarious, and what happens often too is you get people who are good roasters, who are good at being in roast, and so, Dean Martin would always bring back some of these same people because they were
Right.
you You could do it virtually. It would cost almost nothing and then just say every 5 minutes, so, "Yes, please donate to support this effort."
Right.
Created
Not
something, and it was a uh, Amanda, that's one thing that, to her credit, I think Angela understood, is that you've gotta figure out ways to make this fun.
yes. Yeah.
Uh, and so many people in LP don't get that, and and every once in a while, I'll just see somebody, they just disappear because 'cause they're burned out.
That's a real thing. Um, and that's one of the things where, like, when we try to bring people back in, a lot of times we do have names, like, on a list, and, uh, it's hard when people have given so much of their time to the LP and seemingly gotten nothing in return, right? It's it's hard to convince them to come back. But yeah, I think and a roast in particular, it's really hard. If you're doing a roast in good faith, it's actually really hard to not bond further. So I think it would actually just
Yeah,
be a good bonding exercise for the party. Who
yeah, and,
knows?
I don't wanna mention names too, but somebody at LP National mentioned, that she woke up early and her husband's blood sugar dropped really low, and she still went back and did convention business. I said, "No,
Yeah.
take care of your husband,
Yeah.
or take care of yourself." We've got some people who are, and I respect them, but sometimes I said, "I'm a little bit worried about you working too much." You've gotta look out for these people. It really is important to understand what's going on with them.
Yeah. And just make sure there isn't that burnout, right? Because then you lose people. So it's
uh,
always a question of, okay, how do I keep this person engaged without driving them nuts? Um, and for ourselves too. I think sometimes we need to ask ourselves that.
well, that's, just with my own show, I don't bring anybody back for 50 shows. I don't wanna risk asking them too much.
Mhm, mhm.
So I just say, "Okay, you were on show number 75. I'm not gonna ask you again until 126." So and I know I can do that if I really like somebody.
Yeah, that's
It's
a good
it's not
policy.
one of my best characteristics, but I know it's just, but sometimes it does mean, "Boy, I'd really like to bring him back on." Up, it's too early, can't do that, but yes,
Okay,
I
yeah, some flexibility is fine too.
I do very well with numerical limits though, and,
Mhm.
you know what? I was arguing too much on Twitter, and then I just said, "Okay, first I made it 100, then I made it 2." And I've told other people, said, "Yeah, do something like this, make up your own number."
That's actually a really good policy.
Yeah.
And it weeds out a lot of bots too. Usually, it's pretty easy to tell who's a bot. And I admit I'm one of those people who occasionally, like, you'll get a good bot, you'll get a smart bot, and so you kind of like I have sometimes, very rarely, argued with an entity that I've known as a bot because it has helped me make better arguments, but very rarely. And yeah, I like that the 400 helping to weed out uh, helping to weed out
Yeah.
bad faith critics.
Well, yeah, well, Amanda, I'll admit it, I raised it to 400 after having an argument with somebody, so, yeah,
Okay.
so,
I won't ask about names,
yeah,
but that's fair.
yeah, yeah, and that was, you know, I you did a great job getting Daryl on. Who had worked with Daryl, by the way?
That
Daryl
was Rob
Chase.
Yates. So I don't know if you know Rob Yates. He's communications director in LP, North Carolina.
Oh,
He's
okay.
a great guy and knows a lot of people, obviously, as a comms director. So yeah, we got Rob on. We've got a bunch of guests booked out pretty
Oh,
far, which is crazy.
I didn't
We've
realize
got
how many people are involved with this organization?
it's hard to actually give an answer. So in the Discord, we've got about 200, which is kind of a small group, but
Yeah,
we're also we're working with people who are helping to organize various conventions or, like, kind of be boots on the ground, right? And they're not all of them in the LP Alliance Discord, but they are our allies. Similarly, we've got folks who we consider part of LP Alliance, but are not Discord savvy. So maybe they're like followers on social media. It's a big group, and I think it's probably bigger than I even know. But in terms of the people that we interact with on a routine basis in that Discord proper, it's about 200. And I like that because we're sort of we're always, it's great to have more people coming on, and so we're constantly recruiting because we need more people. But I like the way that we kind of have these dispersed pockets of folks who are some of them are in the Discord, some of them are in this
yeah.
other delegate group. Yeah.
Yeah, Angela is right about some things. Don't get involved with a lot of the delegate groups because they just get so toxic.
Right, right.
Mm,
No, this
I
is one
I
that
think
we
I think social media has probably made things worse in some respects. Another Twitter argument, but I actually had somebody who essentially admitted that he didn't read what he was responding to.
yeah, that happens a
He
lot.
he
Yeah.
says, "Well, your comment had markers, so yeah, so you're responding to the markers. You're not responding to my actual, 'cause I really do generally avoid name calling on social media, but I will say, yes, you're illiterate
Mhm. Yeah.
because you're not reading.
Yes. Yeah.
You're not reading or you're not listening, and I just there's so much of that. It's just
Yeah.
it's
That's
funny.
why I always try to really amplify people who do write critically on social media. I think it's actually an incredible tool that can be used really well and be used to spread knowledge and spread ideas. But it's got to be the users themselves who take that initiative to promote folks who are doing that. So like when I see anyone do a long thread, I'll try to take the time to read it if it's about something that, that I'm interested in, if it's about LP stuff, um, and share it because I do think it's really important to reward people for thought and for thoughtful work.
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough good ways to incentivize good behavior. It's really I'm not sure how we do that.
Yeah,
It's so much easier to penalize bad behavior, and we try to assume what people's attention intentions are, which is often impossible to know unless you hear them say them.
right, right, yeah, and I mean, again, that's part of what we're trying to do with the torch and with having a movement journal is okay. So, what are some of these good ideas? Let's actually amplify them. Um, And, I'm impressed and I'm very heartened by the folks that we have on board right now, but, we're always growing, and it is definitely going to be an uphill battle making sure that, people are able to have their ideas shared uh, and engaged with, again, in good faith on the merits of the idea. But I agree with you. It's difficult when a lot of times people are drawn more to sticks than carrots, and so it's much easier to penalize bad behavior than reward good behavior. You kind of have to get creative there.
Well, I think in some cases we have a case where more and more people are just wanting to consume, uh, fear porn or dirt, and, I think there's also a contingent that's getting sick and tired of that. There were a few people, but for example, the reaction to the Glenn Greenwald expose was most people just said, "Who cares?"
Mhm.
I was glad
Yeah.
to see that.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah, you know, it really says, well, why are you going to you shouldn't have this info. You shouldn't have see this anyway. So who cares? That's
Yeah.
how I feel about it. It's really telling. And I mean, unless he's doing something with kids, I don't really care.
Yeah. And that is when people I do see people getting more and more tired of kind of the cotton candy shock value posts. Sometimes, it's a good punchy line to get people in, but then people actually are hungry for actual intellectual engagement. You just have to whet their appetite first. And then they recognize, oh wow, this is really good and I want more of it. But again, we've got to do that initial work.
Maybe they'll get something hungry for something positive again.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always remind myself that Angela and Austin seem like really remarkable parents. Uh,
Mhm.
it's that kid is amazing. But I can disagree with them, but still remind myself of that. So
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, I don't think we should talk about people's kids generally, but I
Yeah.
think that's okay. So yeah,
Right. Well, I mean, people are complex too. That again, that's one of those reasons that like I don't waste my time hating people in politics because it makes me less of a logical thinker if I'm hating someone, then like my thinking gets clouded. And B, there's so much else that's useful about them and that's interesting about them. And I don't like limiting myself by saying, okay, well, I'm gonna hate this person or not associate with them. It takes a lot. for me to refuse to associate with someone, but it takes even more for me to
Yes.
hate them.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any getting involved with the culture wars, I do think is not a good thing for us mostly,
Mm,
but I really am coming more to the conclusion that one of the best protectors of liberty is still families, and we've got such an anti-family culture now.
mm.
I
Definitely communities, right? And, like, for a lot of people, the family is that first community, is the closest community.
yeah,
But we need something. Uh, yeah,
yeah,
because like, you can't do anything, you can't effectuate any political change, even change that's gonna help you personally if you just act, in isolation. That never works.
yeah, and I was and, I voted for Chase in the fall, I voted for Chase at the convention, but I was disappointed. I said, "Chase, I don't want boys playing girls' sports. No,
Mm, mm.
I and I want gay people to be in a world where they can be themselves, but, uh, I think a lot of these people are just being used by people for higher agendas anyway." Uh,
Well, and hopefully you're able to engage with him on that too, on a non-vitriolic level, because he seems pretty level-headed when you come at him with,
oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just yeah, like, how can you yeah, it's just there's so to me, it's just yeah, I love sports, I don't know, and there's obviously a lot of complexity here too, but just
right, right.
yeah, and
Well, I mean, it's the kind of thing that, like, again, sports organizations are independent organizations, right?
yes,
So it's one of those things that, like, make your own rules for it, make your own
but
regulations
but
for it.
sometimes this is, of course, various, state associations
Right,
of
right,
schools, so
right,
those are extensions of the government. It's
right.
you know, uh, they're so funded, yeah, yeah, the pri and certainly I still have the right this is something I often get with libertarians will say, "Well, he has the right to do that." Yes, I said, "Yes, you have the right to do that." I never said you didn't have the right to do that, but I can still say it's stupid. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think you have the right not to wear your seatbelt, but I think it's probably safer to wear it than not wear it. And this gets back to another thing that I think we had happen in 2020 is all of the debate over there were some libertarians who had this belief that, well, we should all wear masks voluntarily make it so they don't require us to do it by law. But then there was other
mhm,
people who said, "Yes, but I'm not wearing a mask, and that's my way of thumbing my nose at mask mandates." So where do you reconcile that? And I do think that really by not wearing a mask, I was saying, "Hey, I oppose mask mandates."
mhm. Yeah, I like, again, I don't think doing something so that you won't be forced to do something is ever a good strategy. Like, I mean, in that case, you're being forced to do it anyway. You're just
Yes.
preemptively being forced to do it. And if a state has a chance to institute another regulation, it's going to do it. It doesn't matter whether you're doing it voluntarily or not. Um, if they see something done voluntarily, they'll want to codify it. I also wasn't fond of people who just had that immediate reaction to, well, because the government made this rule, then I won't do XYZ without thinking about, what they actually want and what they care about. But when people would just, consider what their interests were, what their priorities were, what they thought made sense for them given their values, they made different decisions, and I didn't understand the judgment either way. Like, I didn't understand what I didn't like was people trying to force their beliefs either way on other people.
I think there were a lot of emotions about it, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, Chase had a different Twitter account, so I don't know what was in that Twitter account. There's no Twitter archive, unfortunately. I really did. I just kind of took, I often said I thought the best selling point for Chase when he got nominated was said, Chase, there's 5 people who are 70 plus and you're 39. Go with that. You know, and to their credit, Amanda, this is something the Mises Caucus did, and Ron Paul did. I mean, really, before the Mises Caucus got involved with the Libertarian Party, I always felt like I was the young man in the LP, and when I would go to Mises Caucus events, I felt like the old man, and I was really, uh, I think the Libertarian Party almost completely blew it with my generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
There aren't that many people around my age in the LP. You have these people who were largely born between, say, before 1967, and then people who maybe were born after 1980 and or
Mhm.
82, and then there's this whole gap in there where maybe there were less people there, but, uh, and that
Yeah.
really would have been the fault of the people who were running the LP in the go-go 90s,
Yeah.
which really was the I think, a good period maybe because the LP was just doing so well in the 90s, they didn't really do youth outreach, but
Libertarian era, I don't know. I'm not really sure.
I
Um,
I've often heard though too, it's, well, like, some people said, "Well, all the young people are socialists." Like, no, they're not.
no,
Like in
no.
Argentina, it's
Well, and so this is the thing that gets me. So obviously, I'm at a university. I This is what we need to be getting better at doing because
right.
I'm a grad student, which means that I teach a lot of the students that I work with are kinda how like, they have libertarian ideas and libertarian
Yes.
orientations. Their only option for bucking the system that exists in terms of their social ambit is DSA. And they will repeatedly say stuff like, "I don't even really like DSA. I don't like the way they're
Yeah.
organized. I don't like some of the people there. They're kinda, eh."
Yeah.
Um, but they don't there isn't a college libertarians. There used to be, and then it became like YAL, but we need to get better at that. We need to be doing campus recruitment because campuses are libertarian cesspools. They're wonderful. Um,
You know, th yeah, and I there's a lot of tr and, I don't always agree with Pat Buchanan, but I think there's a lot of truth to what Pat Buchanan says. There are only 2 times when people change their minds, before they're 6 years old and when they're at college.
yeah, that's fair.
And I think he's right about that. So get them when you're that and you're at a school that definitely has a reputation.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Wisconsin, yeah,
yeah,
really, I mean, the Wisconsin idea,
yes, yeah. Well, I mean, like in the '60s too. I mean, it's big, big protest
well,
school.
going back, all the way to the home of progressivism in the era of Bob La Follette and stuff like
Yeah,
that, I think it's
yeah.
there's such an amazing reputation there, yeah,
Well, we've
really.
got La Follette Business School, yeah. So we have that we have that legacy. You're absolutely correct. And again, it's so many students that will, they'll recognize that I'm politically weird. So they will ask me, "What are your politics?" And they're so cute. They'll be like, "I know I'm not supposed to ask." I'm like, "It's fine." And we'll have these long discussions, these long philosophical, political discussions, and agree on a lot. And honestly, what a lot of them will say um, is they'll be like, "I honestly, my most prominent experience with libertarianism is hearing about that New Hampshire like the New Hampshire party."
Yeah,
Every single this has happened multiple times over the past couple of months, right, with students. And they're not even, these are folks who would come to us if it weren't for that, and have libertarian ideas. And they're stuck with DSA and they don't like it because they know it doesn't
yeah,
fit.
and they don't wanna get involved with the re what they don't wanna get involved with conservative groups at all, or if there
No,
are
no.
what do they hate most about the conservatives?
They don't like they think that conservatives are overly focused on big businesses and, like, not about people at all, which I think is like, again, that's great fodder for us, right?
Yeah, I
Um, because we're all about individuals. They don't like
Yes.
the big business side, they don't like the, like, hyper nationalistic side.
Yeah, that's where you've really gotta be careful, the whole there are so few capitalists out there anymore, and
Mhm,
COVID really exposed all of them. I mean,
mhm.
"Oh, so you're not opposed to corporate welfare?" You really
Right.
you really you really do. It's like, I don't know where the capitalists are anymore, and really the capitalists are still the small businesses and people like that. It's,
Yeah.
I've and you talked about the nationalistic side. I imagine young people also are not hating on immigrants like so many
No,
other people are. It's
absolutely, especially not at, like, a college in a college
what
town.
are you teaching, by the way?
I'm a political science grad student, so I teach political science courses, primarily, everything from, like, intro to international relations to I taught a course on Machiavelli, in the fall, which is great, a course on deception and political theory. It's really fun. The classes that I've taught have been really amazing. The students are great. They're really, really smart, and
Do
very
you
engaged.
do you think this might go somewhere, or are they gonna shut you out because 'cause you're a white girl?
No, I think the hair fixes it. Um, but, no,
I mean, that's a
I
serious question, you
yeah,
know?
I know.
Yeah,
A lot of the students, are no, very receptive. I'm probably being female rather than male helps. I think if it
yeah,
were a white guy, it'd probably be harder. Um, but no, I have had a lot of great conversations with students that also are very tired of race baiting. I so a couple summers back, I taught a course. It was part of this program for people who are like first generation college students. Many of them were immigrants and like all over the world. And they were trying to get like, a head in or a foot up on college credits, right? So they were taking their first college classes over the summer. And I taught a course on US government institutions. And they were, again, like I said, all over the world, all different races and whatever else. And we talked about voter ID laws and about racial issues. And 201, every one of them was like, I'm so tired of everything being so racialized. Like, I'm so tired of hearing that, that black people don't know how to get an ID. I'm so tired of hearing that, I'm not as smart. Um, and like I just at that, that's the point where I just let them talk, right? But yeah, I actually see a lot of them being just so done and so tired with racial collectivism. And that I guess is promising, but it sucks they have to go through it.
yeah, I'm glad that's true too. I think they're tired as well. You know, every time the voter ID issue comes up, I always wanna bring up the story of my mother who worked the polls for, what, 30 years
Mhm.
and was a housewife, and poll workers largely used to be housewives, and, this was in a precinct of maybe 1,000 people, and the whole point is you have small voting precincts, you have these housewives running things. They know who everybody is. I
Yeah,
if my
yeah,
mother I don't I wonder if my mother ever asked anybody for an ID, and I'm
right.
hoping that she didn't. And that's the whole point. That you don't need ID when you know who everybody is. That's why you
Mhm.
designed this, but now you've flipped the chessboard on this system, and you think a lot of colleges don't hire their own PhDs, so you probably won't end up at Wisconsin then, right?
I'm probably, I mean, like, I don't think academia has changed so much since I got into it. Um, that it's not really the kind of place this is gonna sound weird when I say it. It is a very conservative institution, and what I mean by that is it's very hierarchical. There are a bunch of rules that you have to follow and hoops that you have to jump through, and there's a certain way to say certain things, and you can't be too edgy at early stages. I'm just like, I don't wanna waste my life capitulating to like, these are the stupid rules that I don't wanna play by.
Yeah.
And, I wanna say things because you never know when it's gonna be over, and you wanna do something important while you can. So, for me, I am not looking into academia as a career path because, A, I wanna speak to a broader contingent of people, right? I don't just wanna be talking to people who are at a university and in this very, very elite group. I wanna be talking to anyone and everyone. And I want to be saying things that sometimes get me into trouble, and I want to be with people who say things that get themselves into trouble. I want to do big things, and I wanna be with people who are doing big things. So, for me, I like I said, I'm not really looking for an academic job at this point. As far as I'm concerned, the university that I fell in love with is actually out in the world now, which is both good and bad because it's a little bit heartbreaking, but
You mean the real world?
yeah, well, I mean, I guess everything's the real world, right? Whatever wherever you are, that's the real world, but, um, I mean, and I think that there's a great university environment in certain facets of journalism, right? And also, weirdly, in movement politics, you can get that kind of vibe when you're talking about important ideas. There are communities that you find that will allow you to teach and to learn and to build things, but predominantly, I don't see those communities in universities anymore, like actual physical universities anymore.
What do I'm curious, since it's been 5 years, what do the students say about the coronavirus stuff? Because 'Cause you're probably dealing with students who lost their proms or lost their
Yeah.
graduation ceremonies and stuff like that.
A lot of them don't talk so much about it, but the ones who do, I mean, it was hard for them. I think on some level, they kind of just treat it like something that they accepted as, well, senior year was weird, because we were all online. Um, but there is that loss, and all of that, like, I do remember when, like, students talking about how when classes in person started again, they were so, so, so excited and how much they hate Zoom. Like, 201, they hate Zoom so much. Um, 'Cause, it doesn't feel as real, and I completely understand that. So there is that sense of loss, and there is that sense of, like, you know, at least, and I'm really grateful for this, they're very happy to have physical, like, human to human connections again, which I think a lot of people were worried about folks losing.
Maybe it'll turn things on its side. I just worry about the lack of human to human connection that's happening out there, and I seem
Yeah,
like we're becoming more atomized. I don't know,
yeah, which is a big thing. Again, that's another virtue of activism, right? Is like it keeps you from being atomized in every single way, physically, ideologically. Um, it's one of the reasons that I'm so big on it.
yeah, you're out there doing something. I mean, we went down to the state legislature was in session, and we were doing a lot of things down there. I don't know how it works in Madison, but, it's a because you got the state house close there too.
Yeah, yeah. And there's always stuff going on down there too, which is nice.
Yeah,
Decent
is the
looking engaged.
environment there, I suppose most of the professors there are pretty much on the left, or how is it right now? Because Wisconsin seems like it's in a weird place right now.
It's
But
in a weird
obviously
it is in a weird place right now.
Wisconsin kinda wants to go red, but maybe doesn't think this
Yeah,
way. It's had, Bob in the history of people like Bob La Follette and
honestly, and so this is coming from someone who has, like, the schools that I've gone to have been USC, U Chicago, UCLA, and UW-Madison. By
oh,
far, by far, the, like, the school with with the highest number of conservatives that I worked with, at least in terms of professors, is UW-Madison. I wouldn't even call them conservatives, that's not
really?
fair. Yeah, so I wouldn't I'm
Even more than Chicago, wow.
Oh, yeah. Well, so the conservatives of U Chicago, at least in the humanities, are all in one place, and that place is called Foster Hall. And this is where the Committee on Social Thought is. And I actually I took classes with the Committee on Social Thought, but they're Straussians, and they actually are legitimate conservatives, right? So, but they all keep them cloistered in Foster Hall, and they're great. Nathan Tarkov is
Well,
amazing,
I
but
just think of Milton Friedman, but
right,
yeah.
right, yeah. And in econ, it's different, right? So in the humanities, though, and I wouldn't even call the folks at UW-Madison conservative. I'm sure there are some there are genuine conservative professors in the humanities, but by and large, I just see more like sanity from UW-Madison professors. And like, I know one professor whom I work with who is definitely not on the right and would not describe himself on the right, but he does consider himself an ardent individualist. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great for me. We have someone who is a conservative and ran, I think, for Congress or for governor as a conservative in the poli sci department. So honestly, UW Madison, but again, my sample is really skewed, right? Because I most of my environments have been very authoritarian left slash some libertarian left. Again, using terms
Yeah.
that I don't like to use, but
Well,
not a lot of right.
you were at Southern Cal and UCLA.
Yes, yeah. Um,
That's wild. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So USC
That's a
was
rivalry.
it is for sure. Yeah, it's different than when you move
Yeah.
to for grad school, right? Because USC was undergrad, U Chicago was my MA, and then I started out at UCLA for my PhD, and then followed my advisor to UW Madison. So
Okay. Yeah,
yeah,
so yeah, but the yeah, that's definitely a rivalry, the
yeah, yeah.
Southern Cal, UCLA, it's a
It's a rivalry.
yeah. Yeah, I guess you probably don't care about sports at all, though, so
I like well, not that this matters in California, but I love hockey. I'm a huge hockey fan, ice hockey. And when you go to USC, like, you always get into the football, because that's such a thing, right?
yeah.
So, at least when I was there, I would go to football games and stuff, back when I had, like, long blonde hair and stuff, but
Oh,
yeah.
you had long blonde hair? What yeah.
I did for my freshman year, I had long blonde hair, and then it's been blonde most of my life. I always go back to very, very platinum blonde, but yeah, I cut it in my sophomore year of undergrad, and I was just like, "Well, this is awesome. I'm not gonna change that." But it's a lot easier to
Okay,
yeah.
well, I don't think there's much left to talk about at this point. Do you have anything else to say before we go?
Not much, it's just been wonderful. It's been
Yeah.
really, really fun to talk with you, so thanks for having me on.
Yeah, okay, well, where can we find you out there?
You can find me at Ajax the Griff, that's on X, and, I also have, for those who don't know, I have a parody album about the Russian Revolution that is Agit Pop International, substack.com. And then join the LP Alliance Discord. We are at LP_allies, and you find the link to the Discord there.
And you're wearing a Solidarity T-shirt. I'd love to know what
I am. I didn't know I didn't know if that was apparent, but yes, yes, I
Yes,
am.
well, there's the white and blue flag, and then there and
Yeah,
I remember
I'm sure
I
yeah, you probably would
that
remember.
was on TV so much back in the day, it really was, uh but yeah, okay. Well, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel, Escape from the Village, check out my Substack. People are giving me money at buymeacoffee.com. I'm Chris Baker. Thank you, Amanda Griffiths. We're
Thank
out.
you so much.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.